listening to the best of the Martha Zoller Show. To hear the full show each day, tune in to AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN or log in to accesswdun.com and click the Listen Live button from 9 to 11, Monday through Friday. Who would have thunk it? It looks like a lot has happened since yesterday. Steve Moore, how are you?
Hi, Martha. Well, yesterday was a great day. I have a big smile on my face, although the Dow futures are down 500 this morning. So it's going to be a seesaw, back and forth over the next few months until we get this all resolved. But, yesterday was the single biggest point increase in the Dow Jones in American history. So you can't get much better than that. And we regained about more than half of this market that had been lost over the last couple of weeks. So I think that clip that you just played by Scott Bessent, who's a good friend of mine, is exactly the point. And I want to make sure all your listeners understand this. This is about what Trump is trying to do here is isolate China. He is trying to get the world to decouple our economies from the evil empire, which is China today. They lie, they cheat, they steal. They're building up their military in a very dangerous way. So this is a moment to choose for the Europeans and for the other Asian countries like Japan. Who are you with? Who do you stand with? Do you stand with the United States or do you stand with China? Now, I can't understand, for example, why would Japan ever want to link their economy with China when, China wants to take over the entire Asian peninsula? It doesn't really make any sense. But I'll be interested to see, what about the Europeans? They were saying a week ago, maybe we'll just decouple with the United States and trade with China. So good, go ahead, but we're never going to pay another penny for your national defense and that kind of thing. So I think at the end of the day, Trump will prevail here. But what has to happen next, by next, I mean within the next 24 hours, is the Germans, the French, Spain, Italy, the UK have to get on the phone with Trump and make a deal.
And I think, it's going to happen. I feel really good about what's going on. And I think that within the administration, this was sort of the Scott Bessent and the people that thought the way he does and against the Peter Navarro people. And
I think so.
It seems, and I love Scott Bessent. Scott Bessent is right up there to me, and you may disagree with this, with Bill Barr. Just a boring bureaucrat. Whether you like him or not as a person, they just want to do their job. Scott Bessent is he's calm, he's cool, he's collected, and he's clear.
Yeah.
He's clear about what he means, and that is important.
Oh, well, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I'm good friends with Scott Bessent. I've known him for almost 10 years. A really solid guy. He's not going to yell and scream. He's very calm and collected and gets right to the point. And I think he served the president well. And I think his declaration yesterday was very calming to the markets. And it's one of the reasons we had the biggest day ever for stocks. Now, and you're right, Peter Navarro is more of the kind of hawk who wants to start trade wars. Look, I'm not a big fan of tariffs, as you know, but I think Trump is using these as a weapon. And I think at the end of the day, if he can pull this off, we could have freer and fairer trade with Europe and with Mexico and Canada, and then we can just deal China out. And the thing is, this is important. China cannot possibly win a trade war with the United States. They can't. Their economy is imploding right now as we speak. I mean, their market is down. How many times have you heard the media report that China's market is down way more than ours has been?
Not at all, because they're all anti-Trump.
Because it's almost like they hate Trump, and it's almost like they're in favor of China. But the point is, China's economy will go into a Great Depression if they can't trade with the United States, and Trump is using that Trump card to force China to change their ways or get dealt out. And I'm with him on that.
Well, and then, of course, I didn't expect anything other than the Democrats to come out and say, what a failure this whole thing was. But what it really was a beautiful thing. In a week's time, really, Trump has reordered who's in charge. And you have now people talking about bringing jobs back to America that weren't talking about this a year ago.
Yeah, I mean, well put. And Trump. We're the alpha male when it comes to the global economy. Everybody has to trade with us, and all Trump is asking for is, and again, I'm a free trade guy, so I don't like tariffs. But Trump is saying it's not fair. It's not a level playing field. So you guys have to lower your tariffs. Why shouldn't they? I mean, I guess I have to tell you, I've been doing, Martha, a lot of like radio and TV appearances on like the BBC and some of the European stations and some of the Asian stations, and they're all so indignant and self-righteous about how, why is Donald Trump doing this? He's starting a global trade war, and I'm like, well, wait a minute, your tariffs are higher than ours. All you have to do is lower your tariffs, or if you're so in favor of global trade. And of course, then they run for the. So as soon as they hear that, so there's a lot of hypocrisy of these countries. Look, it's simple. You have to lower your tariffs to the level that we have, or else you're going to get hit with higher tariffs, and that's those are the new rules of the game.
Well, it's going to be exciting to watch. And you're right, the futures are down a little bit today, but things are going back and forth. And I think it's going to be an exciting time. And Trump did what he said he was going to do. He's putting the focus back on the American worker, which is the right thing to do. Amen.
Amen. It's so funny because I always get asked, like I'm mentioning the Europeans, and I do BBC. Why is Trump doing this? I said, well, did you listen to him?
Yeah.
He did say tariff is his favorite word. The American people knew what they were getting, and we voted for that. And I think you're going to see in Europe. I think, as I said this on your show a month ago, I think you're going to see a lot of these other countries vote out their elitist, arrogant, self-righteous politicians and put Trump pro-people, pro-worker people in positions of power.
Well,
and I welcome
honestly,
that.
This is really the culmination of what we learned after COVID. What we learned after COVID is we're not making enough of the stuff that we really need here in the United States. And it took, a couple of 3 years for it to really sink in for people and a new administration. That was the main thing that believes in that we cannot continue to have things that we need made by people that are our enemies. That's just the bottom line. It's a simple concept. Yep. It's a simple concept.
You got it, my friend. And
all
so
right.
It's quite a ride, but I have complete trust in Trump because he is the best negotiator I've ever seen, and everything, even when I disagree with him, Martha. And, I have my disagreements with Trump, and he and I are friends. He's been very good to me. But I always believe everything he's doing is about putting America first.
Well, and that's one point that before I let you go, I want to make.
Yeah.
Is that, everybody talks about how terrible Trump is, but you've got, the Signal Gate thing. There were people in the administration expressing different ideas on that Signal chat about what we should do and how we handle our policy. Within this discussion on tariffs, you had Peter Navarro with one viewpoint and you had Scott Bessent with another viewpoint. There were people, so this idea that you can't get around Trump unless you think the way he does, yes, you have to have the overarching umbrella idea of putting America first, but how you get there, he's willing to hear all ideas.
There's no question about it, and he knows I don't agree with him on tariffs, and sometimes he gets mad at me, but we talk a lot about, the budget issues, the tax issues, the economy issues, and incidentally, I was, believe it or not, I was on CNN the other night, and that was quite an adventure, and they were saying, he has these people with different views, that's so terrible, and I said, wait a minute, one of our greatest presidents, Abraham Lincoln, was a very famous book called Team of Rivals, about how he had a cabinet of people who were always fighting with each other, and so he got all sorts of different views, and that's what a president should do.
Yep. Absolutely. Steve Moore, thanks so much for being available this morning on this momentous day. Thank you.
You too. Thanks, Martha.
Putting the talk in news talk. It's the Martha Zoller Show on AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN.
Michael O'Neill is here with me today from Landmark Legal. And Michael, you need you need a scorecard to keep up with what's going on in the Supreme Court right now. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm glad to hear your voice. I'm glad you're seeing colors that you haven't seen in a while.
I know, it's true. It's great. Everybody told me it was going to be like this, but it is amazing that when you see how bright the colors are when they've been cloudy for the last couple of years, it's pretty great. Pretty great. Anyway, so give us just an update of where we are on these decisions, because there's been a lot of them in the last couple days.
Yeah, let's just talk about two of them. I think the one that you just had on your spot there was a good one. That was a case where, and we're kind of moving towards that slowly but surely. We're moving towards affirming the fact that the President of the United States is the executive of the executive branch, right? He is the executive power is vested within the President of the United States. That means he has the authority to terminate employees of the executive branch. It sounds pretty reasonable under our constitutional structure. You serve at the behest of the president if you're a member of the executive branch. And so I think you saw there that case, that Supreme Court case, the court did not get to the merits there. What the court said simply was that the public interest groups who had brought the lawsuit did not have standing to bring the lawsuit, and so it dinged the case on lack of standing, which is a technicality, but it's a necessary technicality. You have to satisfy the issue of standing before you can bring a lawsuit. You have to have a cognizable injury in fact before you can actually initiate any of these lawsuits. And the court said, we're going to throw this one out because you guys, the entities that brought this lawsuit, don't have standing. Nonetheless, it still upheld the decision. It didn't decide that it was going to say that the president doesn't have this authority. So it was a win for President Trump in that regard. But I think it is part of a bigger issue here where we contemplate, and actually the court wrestles with the fact that what authority does the President of the United States have over all of these administrative agencies? And of course, you have these administrative agencies like the National Labor Relations Board, the Election Assistance Commission, the extent to which he can exercise his dominion and control or his supervisory authority over these administrative agencies. And I think you're going to get a substantive decision from the court on that, and probably sooner rather than later. I don't necessarily know if it'll be this term, but there is going to be some re-entrenchment and acknowledgement that the executive power is vested with the President of the United States, and he does have this authority to terminate these employees at his discretion.
Michael, Tom Smiley with you today. So good to hear you. Listen, answer the question about the tariffs, because we have Senator Paul and some of these other woke Democrats, socialist, Marxist, communist senators joining together to pass a resolution against Trump exercising his authority for tariffs. Is that something we're going to be seeing next up on the Supreme Court's agenda?
Oh, that's interesting. There has been some lawsuits that have been instituted about his authority to institute these tariffs, and so we're going to have to see we're going to see how that plays out. Generally speaking, is that there is considerable authority, and I mean when you're talking about just generally on our constitutional structure, the president to engage in international affairs, he's exercising significant power there. There have been some lawsuits that have been instituted, interestingly enough, by I think some libertarian leading institutions that have made some challenges to that. So we're going to have to see how that plays out. But I generally think that there is a presumption that the president has some authority from an international perspective to issue these tariffs. So yes, those are certainly some cases on the docket. And again, you could say here, if you want to look at it from a broader perspective, most if not all of the president's executive actions have been challenged to some degree in courts, and of course that's what we're all wrestling with.
You know, Michael, I know you wanted to talk about another decision that came down, but before you talk about that one, I kind of like to compare this to when FDR came into office, even though the speed is a lot quicker now than it was, because in 1933, he brought in all these new things, and he was sued, and he wanted to pack the court and do all these other kinds of things. Right. I see some similarities there. What about you?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think I don't know if I mentioned this with you, but I think I've talked about it. There are some echoes of that, right? And you're seeing, and this is always, I talk about this in the context of the Supreme Court and the courts in general, particularly with the Supreme Court getting the judiciary's house in order, right? The American people really don't want to see, and I don't think anybody wants to see, these judges, these lone district court judges being able to have this authority to issue these nationwide injunctions. This is something we've all talked about. And I don't think it was something that our framers or our founders ever envisioned, that a single inferior court judge actually had the power to set a national agenda and essentially have more power than 4 justices of the Supreme Court, right? You need 5 justices for a majority for a nationwide action, and as opposed to one single judge. And so what you've seen here, I think, and you're seeing these decisions from the court coming down, which is kind of affirming some of these actions of President Trump. You're seeing the judiciary getting its own house in order before Congress might step in. And we've talked about legislation in Congress that's percolating about limiting the jurisdictional authority of district court judges. And I think, you want to ultimately, I think ideally you want to see the judiciary get its own house in order before Congress has to step in. But of course, if that's necessary, Congress does have that constitutional authority to do just that.
Now, the second decision you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, this is another good one. This is another good one from the Supreme Court. This is the U.S. Supreme Court vacating that temporary restraining order that was instituted by a district court judge in Washington, D.C., essentially halting those removal proceedings of those members of the narco-terrorist group Tren de Aragua. And as you can recall, there was that effort to halt the flights. Remember, the flights were the people. The
turn them around right now. Turn them around.
The flights. Well, that's gone. That's out of that judge no longer has any kind of authority. The court spoke fairly clearly that he does not have any jurisdiction to hear those cases, that if those challenges are going to be made, they have to be made in the context of a habeas proceeding in the venue where the detention is occurring. In this case, these individuals are being detained before they get removed in Texas and Louisiana. So those individuals would have an opportunity to initiate a habeas corpus proceeding, a petition for habeas corpus, in the districts where they are being detained in. And, of course, again, as I said, in Texas or Louisiana, respectively. The judge in Washington, D.C. doesn't have this authority, unilateral authority to impose this injunction on a national security interest and a national security matter, and essentially ordering the planes to turn around. So that was another win for President Trump.
Yeah. So Michael, what is the consequences of that judge's overreach? I mean, he just says, "Well, I lost that one. I'm going to do something else," or does he get censored? Yeah. Or I mean, what is the consequence?
Well, there is some talk. Essentially, there on paper, not necessarily anything other than the fact that he got other than the fact that he has to deal with the fact that his decision got his temporary restraining order was vacated, which no judge wants to see that. But there is some talk about taking some sort of punitive action in Congress. Again, I'd like to see the Supreme Court taking their action. Vacating the temporary restraining order is a strong action here. Mm-hmm. There might be some other action, as I just said, maybe some efforts to censure or engage in some sort of disciplinary action from Congress. Remember, Congress does have this authority, has a role here. They establish, per our Constitution, inferior courts. Supreme Court is the only court that's actually mentioned by name in the Constitution. So Congress does have some oversight role to play there if they decide they want to go down that road. But again, the important thing here is the fact that this national security operation, essentially the president operating as commander-in-chief, protecting the American people, can continue to go forward, and this temporary restraining order has been vacated.
And it's rare. It's very rare. I mean, I remember years ago, Alcee Hastings, remember he was the Florida congressman, but before that, he was a federal judge that got impeached. And, and then he went on to run. So it happens, but it happens rarely, and you want it to happen rarely.
Right, exactly. There is the preservation of the independence of the judiciary, but again, we're kind of in interesting times here. We're the numerous nationwide injunctions certainly demand some sort of action, whether that be action from the court saying, "Look, get your, stop. Let's slow down with these nationwide injunctions," or again, whether there's legislation passed limiting the jurisdiction of these district court judges. I think the American people certainly never envisioned that single lone judges would essentially derail the implementation of the agenda they voted for in November of 2024. That was never contemplated.
One final question for you, and it's not a legal question, but I just want to know, it doesn't surprise me. Does it surprise you that even with all of this, if you watch the mainstream media, you would think everybody's mad at Donald Trump. But the most recent poll has his approval rating going from 49 to 53. Does that surprise you?
No, and I think you're talking about, if you want to talk about his actions on tariffs, and I think that might be driving some of those numbers. He's essentially saying to the middle class, "I see you, I understand what you've been going through for the past 30 years, and I'm trying to take effective and aggressive action to restore the American dream that you were raised on." And I think that's really what causes those bump in the numbers. I mean, again, a small percentage of people hold the stock and are adversely affected by swings in the stock market. So I think those numbers are attributable to an acknowledgement that the middle class has been decimated over the past 30 years and that the President of the United States is trying to take actions to address that.
Thanks, Michael O'Neill from Landmark Legal. Thanks for being with us today.
Take care, y'all.
It's local radio, and that's why you're listening. It's the Martha Zoller Show on AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN.
Joining me right now is somebody that I've known for a long time. We worked on the first campaign for Senator David Perdue together, and since then, Mark Bednar has worked for a number of people on Capitol Hill, some of what some people might call the Wisconsin Mafia, and also worked for Kevin McCarthy. So it's great to welcome him to the program. Mark Bednar, how are you?
Martha, I am doing great. How are you?
I'm good, and you don't mind me calling it the Wisconsin Mafia, right?
Oh, it can't beat the Gainesville Mafia, but we do our best.
That is true. It does not beat the Gainesville Mafia. Listen, you are now in a different world. I mean, you're doing a different job where you can, your opinions are your own, if you like to say, but you're still kind of a communications guru. And there's a couple of areas that I'd love to have your input on that I think that we've I'm not going to say we missed the mark, but we could have done better. The first one is this beautiful big bill where we are going to be extending the current tax rates. For some reason, and you tell me if I'm wrong, they keep calling them extending the tax cuts. Well, these are the rates we've been paying for the last 6 years. These are the tax rates. I think that what that implies when they say extending the tax cuts is that you're going to give people more of a benefit. But what we're really doing is protecting what they already have. What do you think about that?
Martha, you're exactly right. Well, and with kind of 2 points to that. On one hand, yes, it's about continuing certain provisions that are due to expire at the end of this year. However, the president campaigned on several new tax items, whether it's no tax on tips or elements of protecting Social Security from certain taxation. So this is really about getting 10 pounds of tax reform in a 5-pound bag. However, something that should also be added to this conversation is not only are Republicans working to continue these tax cuts and to enact further tax cuts, but it should be reminded to the American people and, to people across Georgia that it is the Democrats who are actually fighting against this. They are, by wanting these tax cuts to expire, they're basically, in essence, hoping for a massive tax hike on the American people. And that is wrong policy. That is the wrong way to go.
Well, and they keep saying, tax cuts for billionaires. But, and according to Americans for Prosperity, in Georgia, it'll roughly cost the average Georgian $2,800 a year if these tax rates expire and they go back to what they were before. $2,800 a year is over $200 a month for the average Georgian. And I don't think they want to pay that. And I think that we need to do a better job talking about this, but also pointing out the fact, as you just said, that Democrats don't seem to care. They hate Donald Trump so much that they don't care if the average person has to pay $200 more a month.
It's definitely putting politics over people, and that's very disheartening because this should be viewed as not an obligation. The term that you used, it's referred to as a tax extension. That doesn't sound like and not all that optimistic. This should be viewed as an opportunity. This is an opportunity for Republicans in the House and the Senate to enact President Trump's agenda and actually revitalize our American economy and get this country back on track. And, this should be delivered with the full fervor that it deserves because, to your point, this means real money to real Americans and, people who are just trying to get by and send their kids to school and, work their day job and, maybe go on vacation and just be able to afford daily life. So this is very important. This is very important to the president's agenda, and it's really important that the House and the Senate kind of continue the momentum that we saw come through yesterday.
Yeah, so we've pretty much got the two bills matched up at this point in time. Mike Johnson was able to, corral that very small majority that he's got again and made the changes so that now, if I understand it correctly, the two bills match up now. Is that correct?
Well, there's still going to be a lot of, in terms of the actual shell, yes, there's a lot of kind of the inside baseball game that still needs to be matched up. It's not going to be pretty. As we've seen, as a House Representatives advocate, I'm the first one to say that sometimes it's more cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs than kumbaya. And so it's not going to be an easy process, but it is a necessary process. And the fact that now that we have the House bill that just came through yesterday with, the Speaker deserves a lot of credit here. Everyone doubted him throughout the entire process, and he keeps delivering the entire conference to get together. So now, the negotiations can continue, and, committees of jurisdiction, Ways and Means, Chairman Jason Smith out of Missouri, he's a great member. He's very smart. He's the one, along with the Speaker, who advocated for one big, beautiful bill the entire time. And now both the House and Senate have a real opportunity here to deliver some real reforms.
So when I saw you on two-way with Mark Halperin earlier in the week, it was before President Trump came out on Wednesday and said that, he was going to pause the tariffs for 90 days and they would keep the 10% tariff in place. And then, of course, China is really the only one of the major countries that has not at least made a phone call or tried to do anything. And so we had that big rally in the stock market on Wednesday. It adjusted a little bit yesterday. It looks like futures are flat today. We just don't know what's going to happen. But your thoughts about where we are now in this communication on the tariffs and what we need to do?
Well, what's really fortunate for the American people, and 77 million Americans voted for President Trump because they've seen the evidence of what happens when he's in office, when his policies are in place. And so with 77 million Americans behind the president, you also now have a House and Senate conference in Congress that also want to be supportive as well. So they want to be able to say, Mr. President, we have your back. But something that they need, and this is not a criticism, it's just a nature of Congress, they need a direction, they need the tools to go out and sell the ideas to the American public. And so what we've seen with kind of tariffs, while the policies, there's a long-term vision for it, there needs to be a succinct message as to why we're doing this, what we need to do to succeed, and what actually a win looks like. As you mentioned, the markets have been a little bit tumultuous, as we've seen. But if there's a long-term plan here, members of Congress, even within the Georgia delegation, there are a lot of talented Republicans in the Georgia delegation, but they all bring different talents, different mentalities, different experiences to the table. And so they need to be able to be equipped to go talk to the media, talk to their constituents, talk to voters that maybe haven't really given them a second look before, and really sell this idea of how do we get America back on track? How do we get America stronger on the world stage? And how do we actually help, the economy in the 21st century?
Well, and in Georgia, of course, our number one industry is agriculture. And even though this pause happened on Wednesday and a lot of good things happened with it, Mexico and Canada have been, kind of exempted from that. So on the agriculture world, they haven't been able to level the playing field yet between what they're looking at related to imported agriculture versus the new tariffs. So it's going to be a challenge. And again, that's where I know I'm getting into the weeds about agriculture, but it is the biggest industry that we have in Georgia.
Well, I would think that, first of all, this week, the Masters is probably the biggest industry in Georgia.
That's right. It is. It is. It is. And we're going to be watching it instead of being there this year, which is fine because, you get to see everything that way. And it's funny because I cut the cord earlier in the year. And so we've had to do, the only thing that I've done subscription-wise is to make sure my husband can watch golf. So, that's we're making it on free services except for the golf. And that's what we pay for. But you got to pay for what you got to pay for, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So we got a question, Mark, from a listener that wants to know what you think the likelihood is of the REINS Act being brought for a discussion or a vote.
Well, it's a good question because it's a really important idea. What we've seen already is that the president is very focused on a deregulatory agenda that actually unleashes American energy, that actually allows entrepreneurs to go out and build a business and allows families to keep more of their own money. So in terms of the mentality of, do we want regulations to be reined in and should they be subjected to more official oversight? I think we're getting closer to that sort of mindset. In terms of a specific vote, I don't know if this is coming to the floor anytime soon, but the fact that all this momentum of what do we actually need to do to get our government under control and our economy to flourish? Those two goals, are very front and center for Senate Republicans, for House Republicans, and of course President Trump. And so, if there's a time and a place, we're probably this is going to be, the environment for it. But in terms of specifics, I'm not aware of anything in particular as of yet.
So, my sense is, and granted, we live in a plus 26 Republican district, so it's a very Republican area, even though we are seeing a few little breakthrough protests that have happened on the weekends and that kind of thing. But in all, we're still a very Republican area. But as I talk to my friends across the country, I'm hearing that people, number one, are pretty happy with what they're seeing, whether they're Democrats or Republicans. They're encouraged. The president's doing what he promised to do. But the biggest change I've seen is on college campuses, even though the mainstream media focuses on maybe the negative, but there's of conservative events at college campuses that are having record turnout. So what are you hearing as you kind of blanket across the country?
Well, it's pretty interesting. The most conservative demographic in the country right now are basically males under 30. When I was in college just a few short years ago, that was not the case. I went to a big school in the Midwest that was basically full of a lot of liberals, and it was a pretty unique fish in a big pond to be a conservative. So the fact that you now have this resurgence of a new generation of conservatives, we saw this with the Reagan Revolution, and now we see it once again. And hopefully this can be part of a lasting coalition that continues to build and that allows young people to be able to say, you know what, I don't apologize for, wanting to protect our country, wanting to actually be able to get out there and get a job where I can get married and buy a house and grow a family. And, it's okay to want a secure border, and it's okay to want affordable energy. The fact that President Trump basically brought this new unabashed patriotism back to the table, and to be able to say, you know what, media, you know what, Democrats, I'm tired of it. And he basically equipped a lot of young people to be able to be supportive of a conservative agenda. And that's great. That's great news for the country. That's great news for as we're still a year and a half away, but the midterms are never too far away. And so they're
never too far away. Yeah, and I just don't think you can predict. I mean, I know typically the party in power loses seats in the midterms, but I think this is a unique time, and it's going to be hard to predict.
Absolutely. And right now, the House, there are very few toss-up seats, but it's going to be very incumbent upon House Republicans to actually get President Trump's agenda across the finish line. That's going to be integral to their prospects about maintaining or expanding the majority. And then, of course, in the Senate, Republicans have a lot of good pickup opportunities. Democrats did not anticipate Michigan or Minnesota to be problems for them. And also the fact that Georgia seems like it's a real opportunity for Republicans to win as well.
Absolutely, and we're going to work hard on that one. Mark Bednar, thank you so much for being with me today. If people want to follow you, how can they do that?
You can either follow me at Mark Bednar on Twitter, or you can go to my firm's website at monumentadvocacy.com, where we can help you out with every concern that you might have with Washington, D.C., help you navigate this crazy town.
Absolutely. Mark, congrats and everything that has been good for you. I have loved following what you're doing. Thanks for being with me today.
Awesome. Thanks, Martha. Have a great weekend.
To hear the full versions of last week's Martha Zoller shows, go to the podcast page at accesswdun.com, and you can follow me on social media at Martha Zoller.